Before we get into our first podcast episode, we need to address something. This is Bourbon Hunter Anonymous, the support group where everyone says, I'm not buying another bottle, and then immediately finds out that they lied to themselves. Normally you hear me talking at you about bourbon history, forgotten bottles, dark corners of the whiskey world, or why a shelf bottle sometimes deserves more respect than a glass case unicorn. But today we're doing something different. This episode is basically couples therapy with microphones. If you're new here, hi, welcome. We're the married duo behind Bourbon Hunter Anonymous. We collect, not hoard. Everything gets opened, everything gets tasted, and yes, everything gets opinions. Sometimes strong ones. So instead of pretending like we magically appeared as bourbon experts from the Rickhouse shadows, we're flipping the script. I'm interviewing my husband, he's interviewing me, and we're finally explaining who we are, how this bourbon problem started, and why our house sounds like a distributor meeting half the time. You'll learn how we got into bourbon, what we actually like, and what we absolutely don't. How two people can share bourbon collecting without filing for divorce, and why Bourbon Hunter Anonymous exists in the first place. No tasting notes, no allocations, no unicorn chasing. Just two bourbon hunters, one marriage, and a very questionable amount of bottles. So pour something reasonable or unreasonable. This is a safe place. And let's get into it. Before we jump straight into question and answer in today's episode, I just wanted to properly introduce someone you hear about a lot but don't always hear from. This is my husband, William, aka Mock. He's 38 years old, military veteran, police officer, full-time dad to two boys and one girl. Our house includes 3 dogs, 1 snake, and an ever-expanding bourbon situation that definitely started as a hobby and has quietly turned into a lifestyle. Mock is that guy, the one who can tell you why bourbon tastes the way it does, where it came from, and somehow still end the explanation with a sarcastic comment and pour that's way heavier than intended. So today's a little different. I'm not breaking down a bottle or chasing a release. I'm sitting down with him so you can actually get to know the man behind the bourbon session. The veteran, the cop, the dad, and yes, the guy who absolutely has opinions about glassware. So let's do it. This is Mock in his own words. Hi, honey.
Hi.
So we're going to talk a little bit today, do a little interview, ask some questions. Do you think you're ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. So people who don't know you yet, what branch did you serve in? How long? And what did you do?
Army National Guard. I was in for 14 years. Started as cannon crew member for howitzer, and then reclassed to infantry, and then got promoted to staff sergeant. Was able to go to sniper school, and then finished out my second contract as a sniper section leader.
You were in Afghanistan too, right?
2008, 2009.
Right. So was bourbon something you were into during your service, or did it come after?
I actually got into bourbon drinking several years ago. A friend of mine, I worked in the coal mines underground. He was a bourbon guy. Up until that point in my life, I really hadn't been much of a drinker. Maybe a couple of beers every once in a while, but very little hard alcohol. And first couple of pours of bourbon were kind of rough. I didn't really know what to expect, and he had a bottle of Knob Creek 9-year. And after a couple of trips over to his home bar, the 9-year just kind of opened my eyes a little bit as to maybe what bourbon was.
Well, I think Knob Creek is it's pretty popular amongst everybody, and everybody really likes the 9-year, so it's probably a pretty solid pour to start you out with.
Yeah, he wasn't like a really big bourbon guy. He was kind of like a big bar guy.
Oh.
So he had built a pretty respectable bar in his house, but he was more of a beer guy, kegerator, borderline professional alcoholic. But
I'm sure he appreciates that.
He wouldn't deny it. But he had a variety of vodkas, tequilas, gins, whiskeys, bourbons. He had a little bit of everything in his bar for any occasion. And I just kind of gravitated towards the brown liquor.
There you go. So this doesn't really play off the last question, but do you think military culture plays in a role in why so many veterans kind of gravitate towards the bourbon?
No. I mean, I know just as many veterans that are just diehard beer drinkers as guys that drink bourbon, guys guys that like vodka, Irish whiskey. I don't really think there's a particular type of alcohol that's somewhat exclusive to veterans.
Yeah. So, was there a specific moment where bourbon became more than just a drink for you?
It was actually another friendship several years after I had left the coal mines. Was a guy, let's call him Ben. Worked with Ben in a mechanic shop, a Ford garage. And I didn't even know that people collected bourbon the way that they do, the way that we do. He had, I don't know, probably 30, 40 bottles. And up until that point in my life, I would just buy a bottle, over a couple of months, whittle that down, and then when that was gone, I would go buy another one, buy something different. I had never really thought about somebody having one type of alcohol, having 35 bottles of bourbon. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me at the time.
How old were you then?
I was 28.
Okay, so we're talking like 10 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah, I was probably about 28, 29, somewhere in that area. And I didn't understand it. At this point, I had drank a decent amount of bourbon. Usually I would never buy the same bottle twice or consecutive. So I may have a bottle of Makers. I would say usually it would take me like a month to drink a bottle at the time. So about once a month I was buying something different, kind of exploring my way around. So I was aware, that some bourbons tasted different than others, but I hadn't really, my palate didn't have enough experience to realize how different some bottles could taste.
So now do you see bourbon as like a relaxation thing, a ritual, connection, all the above?
I see it as a hobby. Sadly, in my family, alcoholism has ran in the generations before me, so I've always been pretty cautious about being the guy that, I'm not going to drink till blackout every night or anything like that. And I don't ever want to have the urge to have to feel like I have to take a drink. I drink bourbon because I enjoy it. I enjoy the way that it tastes, even if it didn't cause me to be drunk for drinking several glasses. I would still drink it just because I like the way that it tastes. I like the variations that you can get from something as subtle as the weather, where it's stored in the rick house, what type of oak trees are used in the barrel, in the cooperage, what the different types of corn. It just fascinates me.
Do you think your military experience influenced how you approach bourbon hunting as far as like your patience, your strategy, timing, even reading other people?
Being a veteran has impacted me in many ways. Almost every aspect of my life has been affected in some way, shape, or form by being a veteran. But I would say, with all honesty, that bourbon is one of the parts of my life that the military, or even being a veteran, hasn't touched. It was really a passion that I picked up after the military. Nobody in the military kind of drove me to that passion or introduced me. And it's just kind of something I came along on my own.
Do you think there's a lot of misconception that the military leads to bourbon, just based on your answers?
I think that there is a good correlation between people wanting to minimize or try to moderate the amount of stress in their life by cutting loose and drinking. I would say that most people in the military enjoy drinking. For one, the camaraderie is very high in the military. I mean, if you can have fun with your friends in the military during daily tasks, being at the bar is going to be a riot. Um, but, as everybody knows, you get a couple of cocktails in you and some of the stress melts away, at least for a little while. And a lot of people in the military are young people just starting out in the drinking age, and the bar culture is really high in your early 20s. And of course, nowadays, being in my late 30s, if I hit it too hard one night, I pay for it for 3 days. But when you're 21, 22 years old, a couple of quarter pounders at McDonald's, you're good to go the next day by noon. Not so much anymore. But I don't think that the military has alcohol as a culture, but I think that it is a common thing that lots of people in that age group enjoy to do. And if you've ever been to a military base, there's not really shit to do except go to the bars. I mean, there's not much out there. So, men and women get their bodies beat up in trainings and stuff like that, and they're sore and they're tired and they want to go cut loose and relax, so they go to the bar. So before I start interviewing Tina, I want to introduce the main voice you hear on Bourbon Hunter Anonymous. She's 40 years old, a veteran, college grad, former veteran service officer, and a mom, which means she spent most of her life dealing with high-stress situations, complicated systems, and people who really don't want to hear the truth. That background shows up in how she talks about bourbon. She researches everything. She asks the questions most people skip, and she's not impressed by labels, hype, or because that's how it's always been done. This channel isn't just about what's in the bottle, it's about context, history, and sometimes the uncomfortable side of the bourbon world. A lot of that tone comes directly from her. So today, instead of me talking about bourbon, we're going to talk with the person who helps shape how Bourbon Hunter Anonymous actually thinks. Let's bring her in. So, for the people meeting you for the first time, obviously they're very familiar with that sultry voice. But you're a veteran, correct?
Yes.
What branch did you serve in?
So I was Army National Guard, as you know, just like yourself. I was here in Illinois. I was Signal Corps, and then I moved over to Indiana, where I was considered cadre and recruitment sustainment program, and I was on the path to do drill sergeant school. I became a primary military instructor to bring in new recruits and introduce them to military life. And I spent 13 years in, and at the time I was married to somebody else, and I had to exit because he needed to focus on his life, and I had a little girl at home, so I went ahead and got out.
We all gotta do what we gotta do. How'd your time in the military shape how you think about discipline and structure?
I think that's a hard one. So my dad, he was a veteran. He was in Korea. He was Army as well. So growing up with my dad and then like going into basic training, there wasn't really a large difference there. I think the biggest thing was going in as like a junior in high school, where things were pretty I don't want to say not structured, because as you know, I'm still friends with a lot of my teachers. But, like high school life is totally different than going into basic training and having somebody in your face.
Right.
So I think I got to see how my dad raised me, what school is like, and then got to be trained by professionals in the military with our drill sergeants and whatnot, and realized, people can yell at you and it doesn't really mean anything. You know what I mean? Like, they could just be mad, but they're not like mad at you, like it's not personal.
If I remember correctly, it's elevated tone of voice.
Whatever you want to call it, yeah.
So you come from a military family?
I do, yeah. My dad was a Korean vet. My grandfather on my dad's side, he was a veteran as well. Some of my uncles are veterans. 2 of my sisters served in the National Guard as well. My brother, he was in the Air Force. He was in Kuwait. I have
You've got some nephews.
3 nephews, yep, that have served as well. one that is still actively serving. But yeah, so growing up, I don't think I was ever really aware of that, though. Like everybody had served in the military. But
So your dad
yeah,
was in Korea.
he was, yeah.
So did he fall into the same genre as a lot of our, well, as you're aware, a lot of the veteran Persian Gulf veterans? You don't ever hear him talk about it. Was your dad like that, or did he share experiences with you, or is it kind of something you just found out later on in life?
I always knew that my dad had served. Just like I knew my grandpa had served, so my grandpa, I'm sorry, my grandpa was a Purple Heart because he'd actually had his right hand blown off by a cannon because he was in World War. So somebody being in the military, it wasn't something that was talked about then because I don't want to say it's bragging rights for us now, but you know what I mean? Like they weren't like welcomed home. It wasn't something that they proudly talked about, not because they weren't proud of their service, just because when they came home, they weren't greeted like we are now.
I think a lot of that generation too, they saw military service as something that they were compelled to do, something that they needed to do it just because they felt the need for the service.
Yeah, I think there was a thought process too, is that if you didn't go and you were a man, is that people wanted to know what was wrong with you if you didn't go.
Right.
Because, draft and everything else. So what happened in my dad's situation is that his best friend actually got drafted. And so my dad volunteered to go because he wanted to go with his best friend. Thankfully, in his particular story, they both made it back and they continued to be friends throughout their lives. So, that was something totally different. And those are things I learned from dad, like in his later age. Now, when I went to deploy to Iraq, I just kind of asked my dad, just offhanded, I don't know what kind of advice I thought my dad would give me, but I was just like, Dad, do you have any advice before I go to Iraq? And it was spooky, and I just remember him looking at me and saying, you will never forget the smell of burning flesh. And at that moment, like, you really realize what the veterans before us really went through and never actually talked about. Whereas I feel like our veteran population, like now, our era, we really talk about those things. PTSD, you want to call it shell shock. We're much more vocal, but until that point, I don't think I'd ever thought of my dad having to go through those things.
Right. Yeah, the VA's really tried to push that type of stuff to the front row. Was it the 23 a day?
Yeah, 23 a day came about, or 22 a day, I'm sorry.
22 a day.
Yep. And we got your 6. That was another big campaign that went through. We have PTSD Awareness Month in September. Suicide Awareness Month, I think that is in May. I'm not sure, but
the whole culture's really shifted in the last several decades.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you think that your time in the military or people's time in the military changes their approaches to hobbies and collecting?
No, I think I know you were infantry, I was signal, I was co-ed, you were all male, so it's kind of a different layout there. But on my side, since we were signal, you had the really geek nerds that understood everything and anything about a computer and communicating, and then you had those of us like myself that were there and we understood the basics and could kind of tiptoe into the nerd realm a little bit and then quickly back out because we felt lost. But everybody, especially being in the Guard, and in Southern Illinois, we had people that were hunters, we had people that were really into trucks, people really into weapons. Myself, I was really into journalism and photography, and there were other people that shared that same kind of stuff. So I don't know. I didn't really see military pushing me one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, the Guard's big on that anyways. You get a lot of diversity in the Guard, and it draws a lot of people that the active service doesn't necessarily draw. But, so how does your service background show up in how you approach this channel?
Well, as you know, I've had several people tell me that I sound like AI. But I think that comes from, becoming an NCO, being in the instructor side of that too, is that you're just trying to have a very steady voice. It's not so much about inflection, which I've gotten better about as the channel has went on. You're not there for like entertainment. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes when I'm on a roll and I'm recording things and I'm really into the information or the research, I forget that I need to sound, I guess, more human-like. But I know that I voiced my frustration of being told that I sound like AI.
Yeah, I haven't spoken on the channel much. Just maybe every once in a while I'll pop down and get a glass of whiskey when you're doing your thing.
Rattle
And
your
be
glass.
like, hey, yeah, shake the ice. Like, hey, let me read one. And it's hard to not sound like you're reading. And as I'm sure you'll hear in this podcast, I speak very monotone. And I have to make conscious, deliberate thoughts to add inflection into my voice so that I don't sound like a robot.
Yeah, and I get that too. You know, it's just, I don't know. It's not just the military. It's just a combination of things. You know, we're both like very professional in our lives and everything like that too. In the workplace, I won't say it so much at home, but in the workplace, I think sometimes it's hard to like shut off that part of your brain because we're adults. We get focused.
I'm just asking.
Okay.